You'll never amount to anything. The words hung in the air like shards of ice, cutting through the warmth of Christmas dinner. My father's voice, dripping with disdain, silenced the entire room. I stood there, clutching my architectural model, months of work reduced to childish nonsense in seconds. That was the night my father disowned me, the night he told me I was no longer his daughter, the night I walked out of that mansion with nothing but determination and tears. 15 years later, I'm sitting in my study, in my own mansion, when my phone rings. It's my mother, her voice trembling. Your father, he's lost everything. He has nowhere to go. My name is Alexandra, and I'm 37 years old. This is the story of how I went from being disowned at Christmas dinner to watching my father beg to live in the very mansion he said I'd never be capable of owning. Has your family ever underestimated you? Have you ever wanted to prove someone wrong so badly that it consumed your every waking moment? If you have, this story might feel familiar. If you haven't, well, you're about to discover just how powerful the need for validation can be and how sweet justice tastes when served in a house you designed yourself. The Sinclair family Christmas dinner was always an elaborate affair. My mother spent weeks planning the menu, decorating every inch of our home with twinkling lights and festive ornaments. That year was no different, except it would be my last. I remember the scent of pine needles and cinnamon, the crackling fireplace, the meticulously set table with our finest china. Everything looked perfect, like a scene from a holiday card. My father, Richard Sinclair, sat at the head of the table, a glass of aged whiskey in his hand, surveying his kingdom with cold, calculating eyes. My brother Brandon sat at his right, the golden child, the heir apparent to my father's real estate empire. At 29, Brandon was already a junior executive in my father's company, with a corner office and a six-figure salary. He had followed our father's blueprint for success to the letter: business degree from an Ivy League university, ruthless determination, and unwavering pragmatism. Then there was me, the dreamer, the artist, the disappointment. At 22, I had recently graduated with a degree in sustainable architecture, a field my father considered hippie nonsense. While Brandon climbed the corporate ladder, I spent my days sketching designs for eco-friendly buildings, dreaming of creating spaces that would harmonize with nature rather than conquer it. Pass the potatoes, Alexandra, my mother said, her eyes darting nervously between me and my father. She always tried to smooth over the tension, to create some semblance of familial harmony, especially during the holidays. I reached for the crystal bowl, my hands trembling slightly. I had been planning this moment for weeks. The moment I would finally show my father that my passion could translate into something tangible, something valuable. Before we continue, I have something I'd like to share, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I reached into my bag and carefully extracted the model I'd been working on for months, a design for a sustainable community center that would serve a low-income neighborhood. It was my finest work, a culmination of everything I'd learned, a physical manifestation of my dreams. What's that, another one of your little projects? My father asked, not bothering to hide the mockery in his voice. It's a design for a community center, I explained, placing it carefully on the table. It uses solar panels and rainwater collection systems. It's designed to be both environmentally friendly and cost-effective. I watched my father's face, hoping for a flicker of interest, a hint of approval. Instead, his expression hardened, his eyes narrowing into slits. "This is what you're wasting your life on?" he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Little cardboard toys while your brother is making real money, building a real future?" "It's not a toy, Dad. It's a professional architectural model. I've already submitted it to a design competition, and—" "Enough!" His fist came down on the table, making the silverware jump. "I've had enough of this nonsense. For years, I've watched you throw away your potential on these dreams." He spat the word like it was poison. "I built an empire from nothing. Your brother understands the value of what I've created. But you're chasing fantasies." My mother placed her hand on his arm. "Richard, please. It's Christmas." He shook her off. "No, Beatrice. It's time she heard the truth. Look at her, nearly 23 and nothing to show for it except paper sketches, and cardboard models. That's not fair, I said, my voice breaking. Architecture is a legitimate career. I'm just starting out, but architecture? He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. You think you're going to be the next Frank Lloyd Wright? You don't have the talent, the drive, or the common sense. You'll never amount to anything, Alexandra. Never. The room fell silent. Even Brandon looked uncomfortable, staring down at his plate. My mother's face had gone pale, her eyes wide with shock. Richard, she whispered, you don't mean that. I do, he said, his voice cold and final. I'm tired of carrying dead weight. I'm tired of watching her waste the opportunities I've provided. If she wants to throw her life away on these childish fantasies, she can do it without my support. He turned to me, his eyes like flint. I disown you, Alexandra. You are no longer my daughter. You have until tomorrow to collect your things and leave this house. My world shattered. The room spun around me, faces blurring through my tears. I reached for my model, but my hands were shaking so badly that I knocked it to the floor, where it broke into pieces, much like my heart. Dad, that's... Brandon started, but fell silent under our father's glare. I stumbled to my feet, dignity the only thing I had left. You'll regret this, I said, my voice barely audible. Someday, you'll see what I can become. My father's laughter followed me as I fled the room, harsh and mocking. Don't hold your breath, Alexandra. Some people are born for greatness. Others are born to dream and fail. I ran to my room, threw some clothes into a suitcase, grabbed my laptop and design portfolios, and left. Walking out into the cold December night with no plan, no support, and no family. All I had was my burning passion and a fierce determination to prove my father wrong. Have you ever had to rebuild your life from scratch? To wake up each morning wondering if today would be the day you'd finally break? If you've been there, you know the cold pit of fear in your stomach, the constant anxiety of uncertainty. If you haven't, consider yourself fortunate, and maybe stick around to hear how I survived. The first few weeks after being disowned were a blur of cheap motels and desperate job searches. My savings, meager as they were, dwindled rapidly. I sold my laptop for rent money, keeping only my sketchbooks and portfolios. I called friends from college, crashing on couches until I wore out my welcome. My architecture degree meant nothing without connections or experience. We're looking for someone with more practical experience became the refrain I heard at every interview. Without my father's connections, doors that might have opened remained firmly shut. I took a job as a waitress at a 24-hour diner, working the graveyard shift so I could spend my days at the public library, using their computers to apply for architectural internships and design competitions. I slept 4 hours a day if I was lucky. You look exhausted, honey, my manager Doris would say, sliding me an extra cup of coffee. You can't keep pushing yourself like this. But I had to. The memory of my father's words, you'll never amount to anything, echoed in my head during my darkest moments, fueling a determination that bordered on obsession. 6 months after leaving home, I got my first break. A junior position at a small architectural firm specializing in residential projects. The pay was barely enough to cover my tiny studio apartment, but it was a start, a foothold in the industry I loved. You have raw talent, my boss, Mr. Peterson, told me after reviewing my portfolio. But talent only gets you so far. In this business, you need persistence. Persistence became my middle name. I worked 14-hour days, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. I volunteered for every project, no matter how small or tedious. I spent weekends studying sustainable design principles, teaching myself software programs I couldn't afford in college. Despite my progress at work, my personal life was non-existent. I lived on ramen noodles and coffee. My apartment was barely furnished, just a mattress on the floor, a folding table, and a chair I'd found on the curb. Every spare dollar went toward building my professional library and investing in better design tools. My mother called occasionally, though we both knew my father would be furious if he found out. She'd send small amounts of money hidden in birthday cards, even when it wasn't my birthday. He'll come around, she'd say, her voice hopeful but unconvincing. He just needs time. But I knew better. Richard Sinclair didn't come around, he didn't forgive, and he never admitted he was wrong. 2 years into my career, disaster struck. The firm I worked for lost a major client and had to downsize. As the newest employee, I was the first to go. "I'm sorry, Alexandra," Mr. Peterson said as he handed me my final paycheck. "If things improve, I'll call you first." Back to square one. Back to waiting tables and sleeping on friends' couches. Back to the gnawing fear that maybe, just maybe, my father had been right. Have you ever hit rock bottom only to discover it had a basement? I found myself working construction during the day and bartending at night just to make ends meet. My hands, once used for delicate architectural drawings, became calloused and rough. But those construction jobs taught me something invaluable: how buildings actually came together, knowledge that would later set me apart from other architects who only understood theory. 3 years after being disowned, I entered an international design competition for sustainable urban housing. I worked on my submission during every free moment, often sketching until the sun came up. I poured everything into that design: my knowledge, my passion, my pain. I didn't win, but I placed third, high enough to catch the attention of Greenspace Innovations, a growing firm specializing in sustainable architecture. "Your design showed remarkable innovation," said Emma Reynolds, the firm's founder, during my interview. "But what impressed me more was your practical knowledge of construction." "Where did you learn that?" "The hard way," I replied, and she hired me on the spot. Working at Greenspace changed everything. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who shared my vision, who believed that architecture could change the world. Emma became not just my boss, but my mentor, teaching me not only about design, but about business, about client relationships, about believing in myself. "You have something special, Alex," she told me after I successfully led my first project. "You see possibilities where others see limitations." Over the next 5 years, I climbed the ranks at Greenspace, from junior architect to project manager to partner. My designs won awards, my name began appearing in industry publications, and clients started specifically requesting me for their projects. If you're still with me, I want you to hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of family drama and sweet revenge. Your support means everything to people sharing these difficult experiences. The watershed moment came when a tech billionaire approached Greenspace about designing his new headquarters, a building that would showcase cutting-edge sustainable technology while providing an innovative workspace for his employees. "I want the Alexandra Sinclair for this project," he insisted. "No one else." The project was a massive success, featured in architectural magazines worldwide and winning multiple sustainability awards. My father's real estate company bid on the construction contract and lost. I doubt he made the connection to the A. Sinclair listed as lead architect. He had erased me from his life so completely that he probably never even considered the possibility. With my career flourishing, I made a decision. It was time to build my own dream home, a testament to everything I had accomplished and everything I believed in. I found the perfect property: 20 acres of oceanfront land with breathtaking views and abundant natural beauty. I called it Crimson Estate, inspired by the spectacular sunsets that painted the sky each evening. Every aspect of the design reflected my journey and my values: locally sourced materials, renewable energy systems, spaces that blended seamlessly with the natural environment. It was both a showpiece for my architectural philosophy and a sanctuary where I could finally heal from the wounds of my past. My home became my masterpiece, a 10,000 square foot mansion that seemed to rise organically from the landscape, with walls of glass that brought the outside in, a rooftop garden that provided much of my food, and state-of-the-art systems that made it almost entirely self-sufficient. As Crimson Estate took shape, so did my business. I left Greenspace to found Sinclair Sustainable Design, taking with me several key clients and talented colleagues who believed in my vision. Our firm quickly gained a reputation for innovative designs that were both environmentally responsible and stunningly beautiful. Success bred success. My firm expanded, opening offices in 3 major cities, I gave TED Talks on sustainable architecture, taught guest lectures at prestigious universities, and wrote a book that became required reading in architecture programs across the country. And through it all, I never heard a word from my father. Have you ever experienced that moment when you realize everything has changed? When you look around and suddenly see that you've become the person you always dreamed of being? For me, that moment came on a Tuesday afternoon, 7 years after being disowned. I was sitting in my office, a beautiful space overlooking the city skyline, reviewing plans for a sustainable community development in Singapore. My assistant knocked on the door. Ms. Sinclair, Fortune magazine is online too. They want to interview you for their 40 Under 40 feature. I remember staring at the phone, a strange sense of vertigo washing over me. The lost, broken girl who had left her family home with nothing but a suitcase and shattered dreams was now being recognized as one of the most influential young business leaders in the country. That Fortune feature changed everything. Suddenly, I wasn't just successful, I was famous. My inbox flooded with speaking requests, collaboration offers, and investment opportunities. Sinclair Sustainable Design grew from a boutique firm to an international powerhouse with projects on 5 continents. How does it feel to be a pioneer in sustainable architecture? Reporters would ask. Like coming home, I'd answer, never mentioning the home I'd lost or the father who had refused to believe in me. My personal wealth grew exponentially. The firm's success generated substantial income. But my real financial breakthrough came from patenting a modular construction system that reduced building costs while maximizing energy efficiency. Major construction companies around the world licensed my technology, creating a passive income stream that quickly outpaced my architectural earnings. I invested wisely: sustainable energy startups, eco-tourism ventures, urban farming initiatives. Each investment reflected my values while diversifying my portfolio. By my 35th birthday, my net worth had reached 9 figures, a fact that still sometimes seemed surreal when I remembered waiting tables and sleeping on friends' couches. If my journey resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. I'd love to hear in the comments if you've ever had to prove someone wrong who doubted you. Through it all, Crimson Estate remained my sanctuary, my personal testament to resilience and vision. I expanded it over the years, adding a state-of-the-art research lab where I tested new sustainable building materials, a gallery showcasing environmental artists, and guest cottages for the architectural students I mentored each summer. The mansion itself was a marvel of modern sustainable design. 5 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, a professional kitchen, a library, a home theater, and a spectacular great room with 30-foot ceilings and walls of glass overlooking the ocean. Solar panels and wind turbines generated more electricity than I could use. A sophisticated rainwater collection system fed the gardens and supplied the house. The temperature remained perfect year-round, thanks to geothermal heating and cooling. Celebrities, politicians, and business leaders regularly requested tours, fascinated by a home that combined luxury with environmental responsibility. Architectural Digest featured it on their cover, calling it the future of residential design, a blueprint for how we can live well while living responsibly. My mother visited occasionally, always in secret. She would wander through the rooms with tears in her eyes, touching the surfaces, admiring the views. "I always knew you were special," she'd say. "I just never imagined this." She never mentioned my father directly, but I could see the unspoken questions in her eyes. Does he know? Would he care? Has he realized what he threw away? I didn't ask. I had built my life without Richard Sinclair's approval, and I told myself I no longer needed it. The girl who had desperately sought her father's validation had grown into a woman who validated herself. My brother Brandon reached out once after the Fortune article. We met for coffee at a neutral location, neither his territory nor mine. "Dad has the magazine in his office," he said awkwardly. He didn't say anything, but I saw him looking at your picture. I stirred my coffee, unsure how to respond. "And you? What do you think about all this?" Brandon sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so like our father's that it made my chest tighten. I think I think I followed the wrong path. Dad's company is struggling, the market's changing, and he refuses to adapt. He still builds the same way he did 30 years ago. And you? I'm his son, Brandon said simply, as if that explained everything. And in our family, perhaps it did. We parted with a tentative hug and vague promises to stay in touch. We didn't. Brandon had made his choice years ago, just as I had made mine. As my 30s progressed, I found myself thinking less and less about my father. I had built a life filled with purpose, achievement, and genuine connections. I had friends who supported me, colleagues who respected me, and a global community that valued my contributions. I dated occasionally, though never seriously. My work consumed me, and the few relationships I attempted inevitably collapsed under the weight of my schedule and my reluctance to let anyone too close. The Christmas rejection had left scars that time had faded but never completely healed. You need to make room in your life for something besides buildings, Emma told me during one of our regular dinners. I have plenty in my life, I protested. My work, my home, my foundation. I'd established the Sinclair Foundation for Sustainable Communities, which funded eco-friendly building projects in economically disadvantaged areas. Emma gave me a look that said she wasn't buying it. Alexandra, you've proven yourself. You've exceeded everyone's expectations, including your own. Maybe it's time to let go of the past and embrace a future that includes personal happiness. I smiled and changed the subject, but her words lingered. Had I built an empire to prove my father wrong? Had I created Crimson Estate as a monument to his rejection? Had my success become its own kind of prison? I didn't have answers to these questions. What I did have was a life I had built entirely on my own terms, a life of purpose, impact, and beauty. If there was something missing, I wasn't ready to acknowledge it. And then, on a cold December evening, 15 years after that fateful Christmas dinner, as I sat in my study, reviewing plans for our newest project, my phone rang. The name on the caller ID made my heart stutter. Mom. Alexandra? My mother's voice trembled on the other end of the line. I need to talk to you. It's about your father. 15 years melted away in an instant. I was suddenly that devastated 22-year-old again, standing in the doorway with tears streaming down my face, my father's cruel words ringing in my ears. What about him? I asked, struggling to keep my voice neutral. He's lost everything, she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. The company is bankrupt. The house is being foreclosed on. We have nowhere to go. I gripped the phone tighter, staring out at the ocean through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my study. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. What happened? I asked, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. He refused to adapt, my mother explained. The market changed, clients wanted sustainable options, energy-efficient designs, all the things you've been doing. Richard insisted they were passing fads. He kept building the same developments, using the same methods. Then the recession hit, and her voice broke. We've lost everything, Alexandra. Everything. Have you ever waited years for a moment of vindication, only to discover it feels nothing like you imagined? I had fantasized about my father's downfall countless times, pictured the satisfaction I would feel. Instead, I felt hollow. What about Brandon? I asked. Can't he help? My mother's bitter laugh surprised me. Brandon left the company 3 years ago. He tried to convince your father to modernize, to incorporate some of the sustainable approaches you pioneered. Richard refused. They had a terrible fight, and Brandon walked out. He's in Colorado now, working for a green building startup. The irony wasn't lost on me. The golden child had followed in my footsteps after all. I see, I said, though I didn't, not really. 15 years of silence, and now this desperate call. What do you want from me, Mom? She hesitated. We need a place to stay, just until we can get back on our feet. Your father, he doesn't know I'm calling you, his pride. But we have nowhere else to turn. I closed my eyes, a storm of emotions raging inside me. Anger at the audacity of the request, satisfaction that my father's empire had crumbled while mine flourished. pity for my mother, caught in the middle, and something else, something unexpected, a flicker of compassion for the man who had cast me out. Does he know about my success? I asked. About Crimson Estate? Yes, she admitted. Your work is too prominent to ignore. He's seen the articles, the awards. He he keeps a file. A file. My father, who had told me I'd never amount to anything, had been collecting evidence of my success. The revelation staggered me. I need to think about this, I said finally. I'll call you back tomorrow. I spent that night pacing the halls of my mansion, wrestling with conflicting emotions. The wounded child in me wanted revenge, to reject him as cruelly as he had rejected me. The architect in me saw the symmetry of it all. The tables turned, the power shifted. The woman I had become wondered if there wasn't a third option, something beyond rejection or revenge. By morning, I had made my decision. He can stay in the guest house, I told my mother when I called. Not the main house, and there will be conditions. 3 days later, a taxi pulled up to the gates of Crimson Estate. I watched from my office window as my parents emerged. Two diminished figures, nothing like the towering presences of my childhood memories. My mother, thin and gray, helping my father, who leaned heavily on a cane. Richard Sinclair, once the picture of power and success, now looked old, defeated. His designer suits had been replaced by off-the-rack clothes that hung on his frame. His commanding posture had given way to a slight stoop. Only his eyes remained unchanged, sharp, assessing, taking in the splendor of Crimson Estate with a mixture of awe and what might have been regret. I met them at the front door, standing tall in the home I had designed and built, the manifestation of the dreams he had dismissed as childish fantasies. Alexandra, my mother said, embracing me awkwardly. Thank you for this. My father stood back, his expression unreadable. The house is impressive, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion or perhaps just age. It's sustainable, I replied coolly. Energy efficient. Everything you said would never work. He nodded, his eyes dropping to the floor. I see that now. I showed them to the guest house, a comfortable 2-bedroom cottage on the property, designed with the same attention to detail and commitment to sustainability as the main house. It was beautiful, luxurious even. But it was not the mansion. The symbolism was lost on no one. These are the conditions, I said as they settled in. You can stay for 6 months. During that time, you'll need to figure out your next steps. I'll cover your basic expenses, but this is temporary, not permanent. My father, once so quick with cutting remarks, said nothing. He merely nodded, a man who had lost the right to negotiate. As I turned to leave, he finally spoke. Alexandra, I was wrong. 3 simple words. Not, I'm sorry, or please forgive me. But an acknowledgement of error, perhaps the most my father was capable of offering. I paused at the door. Yes, I said. You were. The first weeks were awkward, to say the least. We circled each other cautiously, like wary animals unsure of boundaries and intentions. My parents kept to the guest house, emerging only for occasional walks around the grounds. I buried myself in work, using meetings and deadlines as shields against the emotional reckoning that loomed. Have you ever had to face someone who hurt you deeply? Someone whose approval you once craved more than anything? If so, you know the strange mix of power and vulnerability, the conflicting urges to punish and to heal. A month into their stay, I invited my parents to dinner in the main house. It was a formal affair, set in the dining room with its spectacular ocean views, served by my housekeeper on my finest china. So different from that last Christmas dinner, yet echoing it in uncomfortable ways. Your home is extraordinary, my mother said, filling the silence. Every detail is so thoughtful. My father said little, his eyes constantly moving, taking in the soaring ceilings, the walls of glass, the subtle integration of technology and nature. I wondered what he was thinking, whether he was calculating the property's value or finally appreciating the vision he had once dismissed. The solar array on the roof generates twice the electricity the house needs, I explained. unable to resist highlighting the sustainable features he had once mocked. The excess goes back to the grid, creating a negative carbon footprint. He nodded slowly. I should have listened to you, he said, surprising me. About sustainability, about the future of design. You saw where the industry was heading, long before I did. It wasn't quite an apology, but coming from Richard Sinclair, it was monumental. Why did you keep a file on me? I asked abruptly. Mom mentioned you had been following my career. My father's hand trembled slightly as he set down his wine glass. At first, it was to prove myself right, he admitted, to collect evidence of your inevitable failure. The honesty stung, but I appreciated it more than platitudes. And later it became something else. A record of what I had lost, what I had thrown away. His voice cracked on the last words and he looked away, struggling to maintain his composure. If this story is touching something in you, please hit the like button and subscribe. It would mean so much to know I'm not alone in these complicated family dynamics. Over the next few months, a tentative truce evolved into something resembling a relationship. My father, stripped of his company and his wealth, seemed to be rediscovering parts of himself long buried under ambition and pride. He spent hours in my architectural library, reading about sustainable design and renewable energy. He walked the property daily, observing the natural systems I had integrated into the landscape. One morning, I found him in my home office, studying the models of my current projects. This community center, he said, pointing to my latest design. The lines are clean, but have you considered the afternoon sun? The western exposure might create too much heat gain. He was right. It was an issue I had been struggling with. Instead of dismissing his observation, I pulled up the plans on my computer and we spent the afternoon brainstorming solutions. It was the first time we had ever collaborated as equals, and I was surprised by how satisfying it felt. You have a good eye, I admitted as we wrapped up. You always did. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. I taught you to notice details, but you taught yourself to see possibilities. That's a rare gift, Alexandra. The compliment, so unexpected, left me momentarily speechless. As the 6-month deadline approached, I found myself increasingly reluctant to enforce it. My mother had blossomed in the peaceful environment of Crimson Estate, tending the gardens and helping with the foundation's paperwork. My father, though still reserved, had become a sounding board for my ideas, offering insights shaped by decades of experience. One evening, as we sat on the terrace watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of crimson and gold, my father turned to me. I need to say something, he began, his voice heavy with emotion. Something I should have said the day we arrived. I tensed, preparing myself for whatever might come. I'm sorry, Alexandra, truly sorry. Not just for that Christmas, but for all the years before it, for never seeing you clearly, for trying to force you into a mold you were never meant to fit. And I'm sorry for the 15 years of silence, for being too proud to admit I was wrong, for missing your journey from that broken girl to this extraordinary woman. Tears stung my eyes, tears I had refused to shed for 15 years. Why couldn't you believe in me? I asked. The question that had haunted me for so long, finally finding voice. He was quiet for a long moment. Because you reminded me too much of myself. Not the successful businessman I became, but the dreamer I was before. The young man who had ideas and visions but was told they were worthless by his own father. Somewhere along the way, I became him. The very man I had sworn never to emulate. The revelation stunned me. I had never known this about my father, never imagined that his harshness might have stemmed from his own wounded past. What happened to that dreamer? I asked softly. He compromised, my father replied. He set aside his dreams for practical success. He built a fortune, but lost something essential in the process. He gestured toward the mansion, the grounds, the ocean beyond. You didn't compromise. You held fast to your vision. Even when it cost you everything, you're stronger than I ever was, Alexandra. In that moment, something long broken began to heal. Not completely, perhaps never completely, but enough to create space for a new kind of relationship, one based not on the past, but on the people we had become. The 6 months are almost up, I said carefully. But I've been thinking there's an old boathouse on the property that I've been planning to renovate. It would make a perfect small home, completely independent but still close by. If you're interested in staying, my father's eyes widened in surprise. You'd want us to stay? After everything? Not because of the past, I clarified. Because of the present. Because I've discovered there might be value in rebuilding what was broken, in creating something new from the ruins. He smiled, understanding the architectural metaphor. I'd like that very much. And perhaps I could help with the renovation. I still remember how to swing a hammer. I nodded, returning his smile. I'd like that too. Over the next year, we renovated the boathouse together. Father and daughter working side by side, disagreeing sometimes, compromising often, creating something neither of us could have built alone. The process became a metaphor for our relationship, the careful dismantling of damaged structures, the preservation of what was still sound, the thoughtful addition of new elements. My father never returned to his former glory in the business world, and I think he was happier for it. Instead, he found a new purpose helping with the Sinclair Foundation, using his business acumen to maximize our impact in disadvantaged communities. My mother flourished in her role as the foundation's community liaison, her natural warmth and empathy opening doors that might otherwise have remained closed. Brandon visited occasionally, bringing his wife and children, mending his own relationship with our father. The mansion that had once been my solitary sanctuary became a family home filled with voices and laughter and occasionally heated debates about architectural principles. Today, as I sit in my study watching the crimson sunset, I reflect on the journey that brought me here. The wounded girl who fled into the night with nothing but determination has become a woman of accomplishment. Yes, but also a woman of compassion, capable of forgiveness without forgetting, of healing without erasing the scars that shaped her. My father was wrong about many things, but perhaps his greatest error was in believing that success is measured by wealth or power or status. True success, I've discovered, lies in staying true to your vision even when the world tells you it's impossible. It lies in creating beauty and purpose from pain. It lies in finding the strength to open your door to those who once closed theirs to you. If you've stayed with me through this story, I hope you found something of value in it. Perhaps the courage to pursue your own vision, the strength to prove your doubters wrong, or the wisdom to understand that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't in making others suffer, but in creating a life so magnificent that their absence becomes their loss, not yours. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, the best revenge isn't living well, it's living authentically on your own terms, according to your own vision. And sometimes, if you're fortunate, it includes the redemption of those who once rejected you. Not because you need their approval, but because you've grown strong enough to offer what they once denied you. The chance to be seen, to be heard, to be valued for exactly who you are.